The old building still stands on the edge of Berlin, its stone walls worn down by winters and wars alike. Ivy has climbed across its windows, softening the sharp corners of a place that once insisted on silence. If you walk close enough, you can almost hear the echo of small shoes on the polished floors and the faint rustle of bedsheets pulled tight at dawn. But those sounds belong to a time when children were taught to swallow their fears, their questions, and sometimes even their names. I once stood in that courtyard, watching the last snow of 1944 drift through the morning light. It fell gently on the row of children lined up like small shadows, breath fogging in thin white clouds. Among them was a boy with dark blonde hair and a habit of pulling at his sleeves whenever he grew nervous, little Emile. His hands were always cold even in the summer, and he kept a marble in his pocket that he would rub with his thumb whenever the matron wasn't looking. He said it helped him remember his mother. They told us silence was discipline, obedience, strength. But I often wondered as I watched Emile's wide eyes and trembling fingers whether silence was simply another name for fear. Now, as I write these words decades later, I ask myself, what sound does a memory make when it has been quiet for too long? And when it returns, does it come gently or with the weight of everything we tried to forget? My name is Marta, and in the winter of 1944, I worked as a seamstress in the orphanage on Tiergartenstrasse. I mended uniforms too small for growing bodies, stitched patches onto threadbare coats, and occasionally sewed a button back onto a trembling child's collar after the matron had scolded them too harshly. I was not a teacher, nor a caretaker officially, but children always find the quiet corners where kindness lives. That is how I came to know little Emile. He had arrived in the autumn, brought by two quiet men who said only that his parents were no longer able to care for him. I never learned more, and he never told me, but his silence was not the crisp, polished kind the orphanage demanded. His was a soft silence, the kind born from missing voices, missing hands, missing warmth. I write now because I remember him, and because remembrance is the only thing I have left to give. The first morning Emile arrived, a thin fog hung over the courtyard, like a curtain reluctant to rise. The matron announced his name in a clipped tone, ushering him forward with a firm hand on his shoulder. He stood small and uncertain, shivering as though the cold had crept beneath his skin and settled there. I was repairing a torn sleeve near the doorway when he noticed me. His gaze met mine for a brief moment, a quiet, searching look, before he lowered his head. Even then, something in that glance told me he was a child built of soft things, gentleness, hope, and a loyalty that had nowhere left to go. Over the next days, I would see him in small, stolen moments, tracing the grain of the wooden banister with his fingertips, pressing his forehead to the cold window glass, or holding that marble in his pocket as though it were a secret flame keeping him warm. He never spoke unless addressed, and even then, his replies were small as breath. The orphanage demanded perfect order. Beds must be tucked tight enough to bounce a coin, shoes polished until they reflected the ceiling lights, voices kept low, or better yet, not used at all. Emile tried, he really did, but his hands shook when he folded his blankets, and he often lingered too long near the windows, staring at the city beyond the iron gate. One afternoon, I found him in the laundry room, sitting on a wooden crate with his knees pulled close. A single sock lay half-folded in his lap. He wasn't crying, though the redness around his eyes suggested he had been. When I knelt beside him, he kept his gaze fixed on the floor, as if afraid someone might hear even the sound of his thoughts. "Would you like help?" I asked softly. He nodded. I guided his small hands, showing him how to smooth the wool and fold it into a neat, practiced crease. His fingers trembled at first, but gradually they stilled, finding rhythm. "Better," I whispered. For the first time he looked up. There was gratitude in his eyes and something else, the faint, flickering trust of a child who had lost too much. From that day on, he sought me out when the silence grew too heavy. He never asked for anything, never spoke more than a few words, but he would stand near my sewing table, quietly watching the thread pass through cloth. Sometimes he would hand me a button he'd found, and I would pretend I'd been searching for it all morning just to see a small, fleeting smile on his face. Those were the moments when the orphanage softened, if only a little, when silence felt less like obedience and more like a shared understanding, when Emil's presence warmed the cold hallways. I did not know then how brief those moments would be. In the weeks that followed, winter tightened its grip on the city. The windows groaned under the weight of frost, and the children huddled close at night, whispering stories they hoped the walls couldn't hear. Rumors drifted through the orphanage like drafts from an open door. Rumors of distant thunder that wasn't weather, of streets reduced to rubble, of families vanishing with the smoke. The matron insisted the children remain indoors. Meals grew smaller, corridors grew quieter. Even the older boys, who once tried to sneak notes or trinkets to one another, abandoned their mischief as the mood of the building shifted from strict to fearful. Emil became even more withdrawn. He flinched at sudden footsteps. He startled when doors slammed. Sometimes I would catch him pressing both hands over his ears when the wind rattled the window panes too loudly. One evening, while I was mending a coat, he approached my table. He stood there for a moment, uncertain, then placed a folded piece of paper beside my sewing kit. When I opened it, I found a small drawing, a house with a red roof, a tree with round clusters of leaves, and two figures standing in front, a woman holding a child's hand, his mother, him. The drawing was simple, the lines uneven, but the care was evident in every stroke. He'd even colored the sky in faint blue, though most of the crayons were worn down to nubs. "Is this where you lived?" I asked gently. He nodded. A faint smile, barely there, touched the corner of his mouth. Then it faded. I set the drawing carefully inside a drawer, safe from the matron's prying eyes. Children were not encouraged to keep memories. They said it made obedience harder. Over the next days, Emil returned to my table with new drawings: a small dog, a field of tall grass, a teacup on a wooden table. Each one seemed pulled from the life he'd left behind, tiny fragments of warmth remembered in a place that offered none. But then came the morning when he didn't appear. The orphanage awoke to an uneasy stillness. Children whispered of someone taken to the infirmary. Others claimed the matron had locked a room at the end of the hall. No one knew for sure, and no one dared ask. When I finally found Emil again, he was sitting alone in the courtyard, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around himself. Snowflakes landed in his hair, melting as soon as they touched him. He didn't look up when I approached. "Emil," I whispered, kneeling beside him. "Where were you?" His voice trembled like fabric caught on a nail. "They said I was talking in my sleep. Too loud." The fear in his eyes was deeper now, sharper. It was the kind that takes root and refuses to let go. I brushed snow from his sleeve. "You're safe now." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. The orphanage didn't tolerate softness, and the world beyond its gates tolerated even less. By early spring, the sky above Berlin had become a restless thing, streaked with smoke, trembling with distant echoes that rattled the window frames. Each time the air quivered, the children froze mid-step, as though waiting to see what might follow. Their silence no longer resembled obedience, it resembled prayer. The orphanage staff tried to maintain routine: breakfast, lessons, chores, lights out. But even routine had begun to fray like an old sleeve. Some nights, the matron paced the halls long after midnight, her shoes tapping out a rhythm sharp enough to keep the younger children awake. Emil grew thinner, his cheeks hollowed, his eyes dimmed. He still came to me when he could, but even those visits were shorter, as though he feared being seen. He kept the marble in his pocket always, his only constant. But even that, he touched less often. The city around us had changed. Smoke crept under the doors on windy days. Cracked glass littered the street beyond the gate. Sometimes, when the sounds grew too loud, the children were ushered into the basement, where lantern light flickered across pale faces and trembling hands. It was during one of these basement nights that Emil sat beside me, barely breathing, his shoulders pressed against my arm. I tried to distract him with stories of summers by the river, of geese crossing the water in tidy rows, of warm bread fresh from the oven. But he didn't smile. He didn't even look up. When the trembling of the ground finally faded and we were told it was safe to return upstairs, Emil hesitated. He looked toward the stairwell as if it were the edge of a cliff. "I don't want to go back," he whispered. His voice was so small I almost missed it. I placed a hand on his back. "You're all right. I'm here." But even as I said it, I knew my presence was only a small shelter in a storm too large to hold back. I was a seamstress, not a savior. I could stitch fabric, but not the world unraveling around us. A few days later, officials arrived. Their coats were heavy. Their boots tracked dirt across the clean floors. They asked for records, names, ages, family origins. The matron answered with stiff precision. I watched from a distance, dread settling low in my stomach. When one of the men pointed to Emil's file, the matron hesitated just long enough for me to see fear flicker across her face. Then she nodded. My heart sank. That night, Emil refused supper. He curled up in his bed, pulling the blankets over his head as though they could hide him. When I passed by the doorway, I saw his small form trembling beneath the covers. I longed to go to him, to tell him he wasn't alone. But the matron lingered nearby, her expression cold, unreadable. By morning, everything had changed. The sun rose pale and thin, but its light fell on an empty bed. Emil was gone. No explanation, no farewell, only silence, the kind that feels like a door closing forever. The days after Emil's disappearance moved slowly, thick as dust in a forgotten room. The children sensed the shift, though no one spoke of it aloud. They looked over their shoulders more often. They whispered less. They clutched their blankets at night, as if they feared the morning might come for them too. I returned to my sewing table, but my hands shook whenever I threaded the needle. The matron insisted that everything continue as before, beds made, floors scrubbed, silence enforced. But even she seemed rattled, her posture more rigid than usual, her gaze darting toward the gates whenever footsteps approached. I found myself lingering near Emil's old bed, smoothing the creases in the blanket he had left behind. On the windowsill, I discovered something I had never seen him hold. A second marble, slightly larger than the one he always kept in his pocket. It was pale blue, the color of the sky in his drawings. Had he left it? Or had it rolled from some forgotten corner, finally coming to rest? I tucked it gently into my apron. Later that day, I went to the drawer where I had hidden his drawings. The papers were worn at the edges, the crayon lines faint. Yet each one held a piece of him, a quiet wish, a memory, a hope softened by time. I spread them across my sewing table, touching each image with the care one gives to fragile things. A house with a red roof, a teacup on a wooden table, a field of tall grass, a dog whose ears drooped too far to be realistic. Every drawing was a whisper of the life he had been taken from, a life that now lived only on those scraps of paper. I knew better than to ask where he had gone. Questions were discouraged, answers were dangerous, but still I waited for a sign, a letter, a message, a stranger pausing at the gate. None came, and so I did the only thing I could. On a quiet morning before the children awoke, I slipped out to the courtyard. The air was cool, the first light of dawn casting long shadows across the stones. I knelt beside the oldest tree, its roots twisted deep into the earth, and there, in the soft soil, I buried Emil's drawings, not to hide them, but to keep them, to let them rest somewhere gentler than a drawer that might someday be emptied by indifferent hands. I pressed the pale blue marble into the ground above them, marking the place where his memories would remain. No ceremony, no words, only a promise, silent but steadfast. As I stood, the wind swept softly through the courtyard, rustling the branches above me. It sounded like a sigh, like the breath of a child finally at peace. Even now, decades later, I return to that memory. And I carry Emil with me, not as the frightened boy in the orphanage, but as the child who dared to draw color into a world turning gray. Memory, dear reader, is the quietest form of resistance. Each time we speak the name of a child nearly forgotten by time, we stitch a small tear in the fabric of the past. Emile's voice was taught to be silent, but silence cannot erase a life, not when someone remains to remember. And so I leave you with this. What becomes of the small ones lost to war? They live where our hearts are willing to carry them. If this story moved you, I gently invite you to like and subscribe so that more lost voices may find their way back into the light. Nova versão do GPT disponível. Continue conversando na versão antiga ou inicie um novo chat na versão mais recente.